Well, now I'd like to turn to somebody that you've met many times on our show, and I'm so happy that he's back again tonight, Martin Breckbill, MMR. You've seen Martin scratch build cars and build from kits and so forth. But tonight, I think you're going to see a different side of Martin's modeling. Martin, welcome.
Oh, goodness. Now I have to show a different side. I don't know. Maybe I should turn around. But I can't screen share since I'm disabled. So whoever's got control has to enable my screen sharing.
You are enabled.
Yay! You should never really enable me. That's really dangerous. Okay, so this is not the first slide somehow. Okay, well, there's the first slide. It's kind of just a title, but this is the really the starter level of resin casting. Resin casting 101. Basic techniques, a little bit more, and I have to always thank John Griffith, who got me started on this, and Ed Rutling, who really was one of my mentors for several years before he died on resin casting. And a little bit at the very end, you'll see why I give him credit. Okay, why do you want to do resin casting other than make a mess? Well, you can make a lot of copies of the exact same thing over and over and over, which sounds boring until you actually need, 3,000 stumps on your layout of 14 different types, or barrels and crates and windows and car parts, and you need them all to be exactly the same, particularly on the car parts, roof supports, scenery stuff. Whenever you need something you need to replicate. It's fairly quick and easy, actually. I can save time. And I say that tongue-in-cheek firmly, because sometimes when you think you're saving time is exactly when you go down the rabbit hole to disaster zone. But generally that doesn't happen too often if you're careful. Okay, stuff you need. These are all suggestions. I'm not going to read all this stuff to you. There's lots of slides, lots of words. You can read this all later off of YouTube or wherever. If you want to copy my slides, I'll just send them to you. There's some minimum requirements. Well, you need a master. That's the thing you're going to make copies of. You need a scale because you're going to have to weigh out your RTV. You need something to mix stuff in. You need some stirring tools. You need some more mold making material. Can't make molds without the RTV. You need some 2-part resin. Really critical, a good level workspace. I don't mean something that's sort of level or close to level. I mean level, because otherwise stuff seeks its lowest point in your shop, overflows your box, your mold, and makes a good mess. But critically here, safety. This is chemistry, oddly enough, something I have a few 4+ decades of experience with. This is just chemistry at home, but it's nothing to mess with. You do not want to get this stuff in your eyes. Some people get really nasty allergies. You want to get some good gloves, and this isn't for everybody. Sometimes if you get this stuff on you, it's a problem, or it can be a problem. Mold process. Well, you need some stuff. So you need a master. This is the thing you're going to make. You're going to make copies of. You build one, you create one, you make it as perfect as you can make it. It's the absolute perfect one, and you need 6 or 8 or 20 of them identical. The odds are you scratch putting 20 identical things is 0. You might even get 2 to be the same, but the third one's going to be slightly different. Things wander. So this is a great way, you want to make 50 of the same thing. So you want to make it as perfect as you can make it. It's going to be the reference material that you're going to make copies of. You can make this out of anything you want, but there's some recommendations. You do not want it to be something that is obviously porous or soft or crushable. You want something nice and solid. If it's metal, that's great. If you solder it all up, clean it all up, that's great. Styrene, wonderful. Wood, slightly problematic because it's porous. And if it's porous, your RTV is going to get into every pore, every crack. And okay, so back to styrene and metal. Every crack, every seam where it can creep into it, it can get in there. And that makes it hard to get it back out. So you're going to have to make sure every possible surface where you don't want the mold material to get into is sealed. All this other stuff is whatever you want. But that's the critical stuff there. So I do some wood ones. I did styrene ones. You want to paint it. Doesn't really matter what you paint it with as long as it's sealed. You want a nice sealed surface. Okay, mold boxes. You need a box to put your master in so you can pour your RTV on top of it and make a mold. I've used paper cups, used cardboard boxes. I like these plastic boxes that where I used to work, they used to throw away so many thousands of them. They actually had their own recycling bins on every single floor of a 14-story building, which is, last I checked, the largest brick building in the world now. So I had plenty of these. I can take a shopping bag of these home every day. But you don't have to use any one particular thing. Scrounge. You've heard that before. It still holds true. Find something that works. Or you can build a box. Except this is exactly the way I wouldn't do it because this one's all wood. And your RTV and your mold, it's going to bind into that wood. It's going to be a bear to get back out of that wood. It's going to be, so you end up having to paint everything twice. So I don't make them out of wood. Okay, so let's pour some RTV. You need a scale, mom's food scale. Well, that's daring. This is like putting paint to dry in the oven. Mom does not like that. So you're going to steal her food scale. Be discreet about it and put it back nice and clean. Measuring tools, you may or may not need them. Mixing pots, well, we'll get to that. Other stuff, stirring tools. You stir with scrap wood, whatever you got. Toothpicks, well, if you get something stuck in your teeth, you need those. Scales, okay. Don't get the old antique scale. Get yourself a nice digital scale that has grams or ounces on it, preferably grams, because you want to measure in small amounts. Ounces are a little big. So this comes in tenths of grams. It's what I use. I run upstairs, grab it out of the Lazy Susan, warn my wife, grab the roll of wax paper on the way by, go downstairs, and I'm mixing up RTV. Oh, she's amazingly tolerant. Okay, how much RTV do you need to fill a mold? I have no idea. I always just guesstimate it. You can measure it if you want. I think this is the old Archimedes method. Pour water in it, pour the water out, measure the amount of water. The only problem with that is it makes everything wet. And then you got to dry everything. So I'd rather just mix up enough RTV and get it right the first time. All this other stuff, well, you follow instructions. It's usually a 1 to 10 mix, the 1 being the catalyst by weight. You mix it up. You don't want to mix it fast. You don't want to incorporate air bubbles because you got to get the air bubbles out later. And sometimes getting the air bubbles out is annoying. And you want to pour it paint it onto your item that's in the bottom of your box and leave it alone for 24 hours. You want it covered maybe a 1/4 inch max. You don't need more than a 1/2 inch surrounding each item. Depending on the type of RTV, you can get a very floppy RTV, you can get a very stiff RTV. Either way you want to go. Getting the bubbles out, one trick I use sometimes, okay, you can get vacuum chambers, you can wrap it on the side with a stick. I take it upstairs and run a load in the dryer and put it on top of the dryer. The vibrations from the dryer pop out all the bubbles really nicely. So there's a box. I made this one. It's just styrene. It's styrene glued down to a piece of glass, not perfectly flat. So it has a nice advantage. This is the master. It's actually, that was made out of wood. It's painted some nondescript gray. These little pieces in the corners are just insurance that nothing leaks. So it's all glued down to the glass. mix up the RTV, pour it in. I was amazingly tidy. I only spilled a little over here. Very rare occasion. I'm usually a lot sloppier. Well, after 40 years of chemistry, you get sloppy. I figure this wasn't going to hurt me any more than anything else ever has. When the RTV is dry, that set up and cured the next day, just get a pair of needle nose pliers and break the box apart. Just throw this away. This is trash as far as I'm concerned. You want to recycle the styrene and make another box, go ahead. This piece just peels right off the glass. Got a nice cavity for the resin. And you can recover the master off a glass. Just take a razor blade and pop it underneath. It'll come off. Okay. It's going to use the mold. Okay. There's all kinds of stuff you might need. And what you need is what you need. It's not what everybody needs. Everybody has a different style of how they handle resin and RTV, and you got to play with this stuff. I spent 4 or 5 years playing with it before I figured out what I was happy with. And basically I decided I really don't need very much of this stuff. Now, if it makes you feel happier, use it all, get it all, make use of it. But I found that this is something that's overly complicated and can be stripped down to really basic operations. Okay, I don't measure the amount of resin. I freely confess I don't do this. I eyeball it, but I almost always have 3 to 5 extra molds on the bench waiting for the leftover resin. And when I say leftover resin, I have molds that take 3 drops of resin. Those are insulators for overhead wire. So I use every single drop of the resin when I mix it up. So, you put component A, component B in the cups. It's 1-to-1. I like the medicine cups. They work very nicely. Okay. You don't want to make a mess with this stuff, and you don't want to get it on you. I've said it already. You want to have some ventilation. Some resins are fairly mild in aroma. Some are pretty damn heinous. There's one in particular brand of kits I won't name, but when I buy a kit from him and it's in the box, in my mailbox, I can smell it before I get it into the house. I haven't even taken it out of the box yet. So I hate to think about what that smells like if you're mixing it up. So you don't want to be breathing this stuff unless it's absolutely necessary. A good exhaust fan in the room helps. Okay, release agents. A moment on release agents. I usually don't use one. This is something Ed Rutling and I had a long discussion about. He was always like, why do you do that? I was like, well, because people say you need to. And he's like, yeah, prove it. I don't use them. Why are you? And I thought, okay, you're right. I generally don't use it for small stuff, but for some odds and ends, I do use one. And what the trick was ultimately is gloss spray paint as a release agent. And you just spray the mold with, I use Tester's gloss spray paint. Pick a color you like, it doesn't matter. The resin doesn't care, the mold doesn't care, and you won't care because you're going to paint over it anyhow later because it's going to come out of the mold primed with that paint attached to the resin. And I'll show you that later. Okay, you might want to wear gloves if you're sloppy. If you're an old chemist like me, you grew up not wearing gloves and you still hate to think about putting them on, except when you're really using something terribly bad. So you measure out parts A and B into their respective cups, 50-50. Eyeball it is good enough. Generally, you can see through those clear medicine cups. And I just pour them back and forth at each other. There's a technical name for how that type of mixing. It's pretty easy. Once it looks homogeneous, mix it up with a little bit of a stick, or in my case, I've moved on to using transfer pipettes because I think they're more accurate and then I can handle the resin better. But you don't want to stir this and make bubbles. You want to do it nice and simple, gentle, get it nice and clean together. And you can pour it back and forth like I do, but you don't want to mess with, you don't want to add air bubbles. And how much time you have to do this is really dependent on what kind of resin you've got and who made it and how old it is even. But time is a factor. So we'll come back to that as well. You don't have all day because this stuff's going to cure in your hand if you hold it long enough. So if you got extra resin, you pour it in another mold. I always have 3 to 6 round, and I've gotten to love using transfer pipettes to move resin, mix resin, to pour it from one cup to the other, to put it into the molds, to push it into cavities, undercuts. I love using these transfer pipettes for that. Okay, the only problem with that is one and done. You can't recycle these. You can't use them for the next time you use resin. So you eat these up with every single time you pour resin. So you do what I do, and you buy a carton of 1,000, and you find out that they last for a little while. Okay, I never cover these things over. I don't clean off the stirring stick and toothpick. Really? That's why you have a trash can. Usually the casting comes out. Sometimes you have to push it out from the other side, persuade it a little bit. Depends on how much of an undercut, how complicated it is, how much fine detail in it. You may have to kind of gently persuade it to pop out. And release agent, okay, I don't use any. I don't think it's necessary. And if you do it, like I said, with the priming it with paint, it's ready to go. Okay. You always want to make 10 to 15 more, count on making 10 to 15% more castings than you think you really need. You think you need 5? Now make 8 or 9. Some of these aren't going to work. It's just going to happen. I love the Tester's gloss spray paint. I used to use a gloss. I started off with a gloss blue, which is kind of funky, but I went to a gall gray, I think it is. Gloss gall gray. Looks like gray prime paint, primed material when you're done. And that extra mold, hey, crates, barrels, stuff you can never have too many of on your railroad. You paid for it. You paid for that resin. Don't waste any of it. Put it somewhere. Use it. Okay, so extra stuff. There's a headlight, crates, barrels. There's actually a lead truck wheel. I think that's an end sill there. Stumps. This is a DeSoto grill. Okay, I didn't want a DeSoto grill. Somebody wanted me to make DeSoto grills for him. I said, fine. And it got here. I thought, man, that's a really tiny thing. Well, that's not very much resin. So I'm going to mix up some resin. Hey, I'll make some stumps while I'm doing it. And these are X-dot ones. Eventually your RTV mold fails. They go bad. They start to crumble. They fall apart. The RTV gets stuck to the resin and won't let go. I just mark them out. The rest of the mold's still usable. Until the rest of the mold's usable, I'm keeping the mold. It's still working. It's in working order. Okay, whose stuff to use? I'm not going to tell you that. I'll tell you who I do use. It depends. And this goes back to that time component. A lot of resins you can buy that are cheap and easy to get are 3-minute resins. You got 3 minutes of working time before it cures. 3 minutes is not a very long time to pour it out, measure it, dump it together. So once you've got it dumped together, the clock's ticking. And you got to mix it, get it ready, transport it, put it into your mold. Well, I started off with 3-minute resins and, didn't always get it all out of the mixing cup. And I thought that's kind of wasteful. But, I thought I'm learning. I'll try this guy's resin. I'll try this company's resin. I'll try that. But, I went around the block a few times. Okay, so there's Alumilite. Everybody knows Alumilite. You can get it from Micromark and other places. I stumbled across Freeman's 10, 12 years ago. They have a 6-minute resin. They have a 20-minute resin that's clear. So if you have something you want to actually see through after you're done casting it, but it's got 20 minutes. That means, it's got 20 minutes to cure, but working time, but then it's like till tomorrow till you can actually take it out of the mold. Well, if you're not in any rush, no problem. The 6-minute stuff, I can do that every half an hour. I'm popping it out and pouring another pour of resin right into it. So there's our websites. I use the Freeman's RTV, but I'll also use the Alumilite one. They make a really nice, floppy, soft RTV for when I get into something that has a lot of undercuts, a lot of complexity. Okay, so I'll show you some of that here. It's a little more complex. Simple molds, squish molds. We'll talk about quick, what the heck is a squish mold? What the heck is he talking about? What is he going on about now? Okay, well, a couple of years ago, 10, 8, I was actually selling trolley body kits, and those were resin cast. And there you can see the blue paint. That's what the blue gloss paint actually comes out of the mold. It's not gloss anymore when it comes out of the mold. It's a flat, it almost looks flat now. So it's ready to paint. So there's the gray. It's not very glossy. There's one trolley end. So, you know, that's kind of complicated. It's three-dimensional. It's not solid. It's hollow. So this is a little more complicated than just a simple flat mold. And this is the Alumilite resin because it's that pink stuff. This is kind of floppy. You pick it up, it'll flop all over the place. So this sits flat on top of glass on my shop. And this is a two-piece mold. This fits into the back of that. So how does this work? Well, you eyeball the amount of resin that's in here to make that. And you put that resin in here, and then you put this piece in, very carefully aligned. There's a little wood knob on the back of it because I embedded a piece of wood inside the resin, inside the RTV. And then you push it in and you squish the resin. And if you have the right amount, it'll overflow just a little bit. I say that's the right amount because the wrong amount isn't enough and you can't go back. You're stuck. So the right amount is a little excess. So you have a little excess. Well, if you get a whole trolley car end in one casting, that's a pretty good achievement, I think. This is a mold that had to teach me how to use it too. Now, you know, I have learned that the mold, it's not that the mold doesn't work, it's that I don't understand how to use it. First couple of times I did this, I got terrible results. I got all kinds of goofy, crappy looking trolley car ends. And I thought, you know, hey, the master fits in there. There's got to be a way to use this. And I finally learned, take one of those transfer pipettes and take it and paint the entire curved surface around all these little pieces in between here where that window mullion is, and then put the rest of the resin in that I think it needs. Works perfectly every time now. So when you have a mold that's not working properly, it's probably not the mold's problem or fault. It's probably you don't understand what the mold's trying to tell you to do. And the molds will talk to you quietly. So you make a lot of them. I mean, why not? Yeah, it's got a bubble in it here and there, but you know, those are easy to fix. A little patching material and you're all set. I'm in a hurry, I make a lot of them. And these are car bolsters. When I'm casting resin, I have 2 pounds of resin on the bench, and I'm probably making 50 to 100 of those because I'll use them all year long. So what can you make with a trolley car end? Well, you can make one of these line cars. That's part of one of those resin ends. Then you just take the bottom and sawed it off. They're versatile. It's resin. It's easily modified. Razor saw, Dremel, you know, you can machine resin. It's not hard. Now, there's another one. You can see the gray before I painted it, or whatever that terrible red is, for a snowplow car. And I just chopped off the bottom again. I thought, well, let's go back to that little trolley and then make a trolley roof. Well, how do you make a trolley roof? Well, this is a piece of stop molding. You can get it over at the lumber yard, glue 2 pieces together, round the end, round the tops. You got a trolley car roof. You flip it over and you've got a nice mold for a trolley car roof. The only problem with this is this uses a lot of resin and it's heavy. And the last thing you want is a top heavy trolley. So I actually made this, I cobbled together this little insert and buried some styrene in it, some bridges in it to hold it in place. Not just so I don't waste as much resin. Okay, Simple flat mold for trolley sides. I have at least 4 different versions of this. There's a version with a door. There's a version with 2 windows. There's a version with a reefer door in the side of it, with a door and windows. Whatever, whatever you can think of, you can make. But then you can make 20 or 30 of them if you really want. I want to show this one in particular. You can see this RTV looks a little funky. And it is funky because this is one of those instances where the RTV didn't quite cure. There was something on the master that interacted with the RTV and compromised the curing rate of the RTV. And I thought, well, I've lost this mold. It's terrible. And I think, well, have I really lost it? And it turned out, no, not quite. I hung it up in front of a space heater for a couple of hours and it all cured. Okay, so it all cured, but it's a little funky looking on the side. I thought, well, that actually adds character to the side of the car. Put a little weathering on that, that gets interesting real fast. So you have sides, ends, you got a trolley car body. Only one trick to putting this together is to build it upside down. So it's flat on the top, so the roof fits on. Like that. That's the old Bowser drive. You used to be able to pick those up for 40 to 50 bucks. You cut off the ends, this drops right on top of this body. So I made some flat cars, traction flat car. A couple of years ago, I thought, there's no traction flat car kits available anymore. There's no traction, well, there are now, but there weren't at the time. So I made a master. This is all wood, painted some hideous polyscale blue, gray, blue, whatever, and glued into a plastic tray. And I just partitioned it off because I don't want to make a mold that big. The box is too big, make a smaller box. And you don't have to, it's not like I had to fill it all the way either. So there's the mold, and I've used it a lot. And I actually have 2 of these, but I've used it a lot. And you can see this is the tester's gray. You just spray it on it. Don't worry about it. Let it dry, pour the resin. Out pops your flat car. 1 piece, done. Well, okay, you got to add all the other parts to it. You got to add bolsters and underbody and stuff. But I think that was one of the kits I sold out of them in about 3 weeks' time. I only made 25 of them, but they were all gone, and I celebrated because I figured I must have hit just the right number. They're all gone. And here's what I wanted to talk to you about. I mentioned Ed Rutling. Ed was the original Adirondack Car and Foundry Company, and Ed actually did resin casting of entire steam locomotives. And this is one of the 260 I have of his. He did these. It's all resin except for the drive mechanism, trucks and wheels. He did a 260, a 280, a 2660, and something else I've forgotten, and a couple of freight cars. They're not easy to find. They're really cool and fun, and you can dress them up as much as you'd like or not. And he got the drivers. I think the drivers are actually British. So it's a cool little thing. And so, people say, oh, you can't make that in resin. Well, no, that's probably not true. You probably can. It just requires you thinking about it a little bit more and developing how you're going to set up your molds and think of, and how they're going to function and assemble. And that's it. I'm done. So if there are questions, throw them at me.
Martin, I appreciate it so much. I know you got to get to the airport to pick up your son. So thanks so much for being here this evening and sharing how to get the molds and how to model in resin. Thank you.
Well, glad to do it. I got a couple of minutes. If there's no questions, everybody knows everything. Happy resin casting, everybody.
Hey, Martin.
Uh-oh.
Yep. You have a question. I'm trying to think of the resin 3D printers. It's sort of My assumption is it's the same style of plastic.
I don't know that. I don't think so.
No, not at all. It's
I would
two
think not.
completely different chemistries.
I would think it'd be very different, in fact.
The
Yeah.
the resin printer is activated by ultraviolet light.
Yeah.
Whereas the casting, the urethane casting, is catalyst
Yeah, it's usually-
added. Sometimes it's one for one or 10-to-1, depending on which
Yeah,
resin.
that's Jim's right. It's totally different chemistry, but it's still chemistry in both cases.
Question, Martin, have you tried using retarders to slow the curing? That's always my downfall with two-part urethane, is buying enough time on getting it setting up in my hand as I'm mixing and pouring.
Oh, yeah, I've never bothered. I mean, that's why I went to the 6-minute resin. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, if I can't get it done in 6 minutes, I need to move faster.
Oh, I found I'm using 4-minute resin that I actually get from a taxidermy supply. Taxidermists use huge amounts of urethane resin.
Yep.
So the price is extremely cheap. And being that the shelf life is 6 months to a year,
Mhm.
I don't mind taking and throwing away half of it because I
Oh.
haven't had a chance to use it up.
Oh, if you can, yeah, if your economics work for you, then make more.
I just have to learn to work fast with it.
Well, part of this is the setup. You know, I've done some custom work for Bill Mosteller, and I have some complicated 2-part molds, but and again, they didn't work at all for me. They had to teach me how to use them. But again, that was one of those things where I actually was pouring resin, filling the mold 2/3, and then waiting a couple of minutes, and then mixing up a second batch of resin and topping off the mold. And that works perfectly fine. And I learned, you know, and the problem is when the resin cures, it generates a little bit of heat. There's a little bit of an expansion, and when it cures, finished curing, it actually contracts a little, just a little. But it's enough if you don't have your mold properly topped off, it's going to leave a gap at the top. And in this particular mold, the gap at the top was an absolute disaster. So it was one of these things to top off the mold very, very late in the curing process, and everything works fine now.
Good point. A final one. You said you didn't use a vacuum chamber to degas?
Nope.
Okay. I mean, I've tried using a shop vac, and it didn't buy me anything because it took longer for me to fire up the shop vac, and I lost the cure time.
Yep. Yeah, that's going to cost you time doing that. I mean, again, if you got a nice vacuum pump on the floor, not many people do. That was one of the wonderful benefits of where I used to work. I used to have vacuum pumps that would go down to 10 to the minus 5. But that would implode most things I would use today. So, yeah.
Only other bubble cure I found was a fellow out near St. Louis that was doing them commercially. He had some of the old Chooch molds. He took the opposite approach. He put them in a air compressor.
Yeah, you can pressurize it and force it in.
He pressurized it. He had a small paint pot pressure container, and he would just shrink the bubbles by bringing them up, I don't know, 20, 30 PSI, and no more air bubbles.
Yep, that'll work too. It's just, but again, you got to have it all set up. It's time, slap it shut, throw the latch, turn the pump on, pump it in, pump it out, whichever way it is. You know, your clock is running. This is one of those things. The clock is always running. Once you've poured the two components together,
it's bang bang gone.
It's you can't look back. You can't say, "Oh, time out. I gotta run upstairs and get a cup of tea." No, that's not going to work.